Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into the smoky corners of the medieval world to explore something a little unexpected. What getting high was like back then. Yep, it happened, not with neon lights or techno music, but under forest canopies, in candlelit monasteries, and behind the thick walls of ancient apothecaries. You might think the Middle Ages were all toil and torment, but believe it or not, people still search for ways to escape, whether it was to reach the divine, to numb pain, or simply to forget a hard day in the fields. The desire to alter the mind has always been part of the human story. And tonight, we're going to follow the wisps of incense and secret smoke to find out how they did it. But be warned, some of these medieval methods were downright dangerous. And let's just say you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes there without accidentally eating a poisonous root or two. Before we begin tonight's journey through history, I have a small favor to ask. If you're enjoying this peaceful corner of the past, please consider giving the video a like or subscribing to the channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming nighttime adventures. It truly helps this little channel grow, and it means so much to me. If you're still awake enough to type a few words, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I find it so heartwarming to see history gently unfolding across time zones, quietly shared together. I sincerely hope this historical story is gentle enough to ease you into sleep, but there's always a small risk. It might be too interesting. And if you do happen to stay awake through the whole thing, at least you'll walk away with a bit of new knowledge. And if that's what keeps you up tonight, well, I'd say that's worth it. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the edge of a clearing, somewhere in what feels like an endless stretch of medieval woodland. The air is cool and heavy with the smell of damp moss and burning herbs. You're not alone. A small group has gathered in a circle. They sit cross-legged on tree stumps and firs, their faces soft with the flickering light of a single fire. One of them leans forward to stir the embers, releasing a swirl of smoke into the night air. It's not just any fire. Something else is burning. A mixture of dried plants tied in little bundles, pressed together with honey and wax. The scent is earthy, rich, a bit spicy. You don't recognize it at first, but your head starts to feel light. Your shoulders slacken. Your thoughts loosen like knots undone. You blink slowly. So does everyone else. You've wandered into an herbal ritual, one of many that quietly existed in the shadows of medieval life. The villagers here believe the smoke brings visions. Not wild, cartoonish hallucinations, but drifting impressions, glimpses of ancestors, hints of omens, or sometimes just a deep calm that settles into their bones like warmth from the fire. An elder woman with thick gray braids explains in a whisper that they're burning angelica root, a plant believed to ward off disease and spirits, but also used to calm nerves and bring dreams. There's wild lettuce too, known to some as opium lettuce. It's not strong enough to knock you flat, but just enough to make your limbs feel like melted wax. Someone passes you a small clay bowl with something dark and sticky inside, resin of myrrh and frankincense, crushed with herbs and set to smolder. You lean back, the firelight dances on your closed eyelids, and you think you hear distant laughter. Or maybe it's the trees creaking. You're not quite sure. These gatherings weren't formal, nor were they particularly rare. Herbal smoke was often part of folk healing, especially when sleep was hard to find, or grief hung too thick in the air. The line between ritual and remedy was never so sharp back then. You were either communing with something sacred, or trying to forget something real. Off in the distance, a church bell rings from a sleepy village. No one in the clearing flinches. The villagers here know that the church frowns upon these pagan practices, and yet they persist. Quietly, lovingly. Because sometimes you just need to breathe something different, even if only for an hour. A boy coughs lightly. The elder wraps a blanket around his shoulders and murmurs something in a language that's no longer spoken today. She plucks a few dried leaves from a pouch and tosses them into the fire. The flame flares blue for a second, then deepens to a glowing orange again. You glance up. The stars are sharp and clear, but they feel closer, not in a dizzying way, just present, like they're watching with you. It's then you realize that this moment, this hazy circle, this quiet communion, isn't about escape. It's about connection, to nature, to memory, to one another. You feel yourself slowing down, not because of the smoke, but because the world here doesn't rush. It waits. One man begins humming. A woman follows, then another. The tune is simple, almost childlike, and yet you can't help but hum along. You're part of something now, something ancient, something that feels like a dream you've had before but can't quite place. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were widespread or isolated folk customs. Some claim they were forms of community healing. Others say they were disguised rebellion, small acts of peace in a time often ruled by fear. Maybe it was both. Maybe that's what makes it beautiful. The fire begins to die down, leaving behind a gentle bed of glowing ash. No one rushes to leave. You sit in the silence that follows, your breath slow, your thoughts lighter than they were an hour ago. You rise, brushing the forest floor from your cloak. The others smile without speaking. You nod back. As you walk away, you notice how soft the night has become. Every sound feels muffled by the quiet in your chest. You don't know if it was the smoke or the silence, but something in you has shifted. You'll carry the scent with you, just under the surface. Sweet, spicy, ancient. You follow the winding path out of the woods, past a sleeping flock of sheep and the soft trickle of a brook, until a crooked chimney comes into view. A single lantern swings gently above the wooden door of a tiny, half-timbered shop. A faded sign creaks in the breeze, Apothecarius, painted in Latin script, now chipped and barely legible. You step inside. The scent hits you first. A heavy mix of dried lavender, vinegar, beeswax, and something faintly peppery. Rows of wooden drawers line the walls, each marked with symbols, scratches, or no label at all. Bundles of herbs hang upside down from the rafters. Vials of greenish liquid glint in the candlelight. And behind the counter, a bearded man with ink-stained fingers looks up from a parchment filled with tight script. He doesn't greet you. He just nods slowly, then turns back to his mortar and pestle. The soft grind of stone on stone is strangely calming. You linger by a shelf stacked with bottles sealed in wax. A few are labeled plainly, juniper, wormwood, rose oil, but others are more mysterious. White hellebore, sleep syrup, dragon's breath. You raise an eyebrow. A small label tucked on the highest shelf simply reads, "Not for common use." The apothecary notices your gaze and chuckles under his breath. He shuffles to a tall ladder, climbs 2 rungs, and plucks a blackened glass vial from the top row. He holds it up to the candle. "Poppy milk," he murmurs, boiled down to its thickest whisper. Very dear, very dangerous. You're not sure if he's warning you or inviting you. In medieval towns, the apothecary was part pharmacist, part alchemist, part magician. Though officially tasked with healing, these quiet craftsmen often dealt in things far beyond remedies. When sleep wouldn't come, when grief was too heavy, or when visions were desired, this is where people came. He gestures for you to follow him into the back room. The wooden floor groans under your feet. The space is darker here, tucked away from the public eye. A narrow table holds a wide bowl filled with what looks like thick, dark syrup. Sweet sap of Papaver somniferum, he explains softly. The sleeping poppy, but only in a thread's amount. Too much and you'll wake on another plane, or not at all. He dips the tip of a small wooden stick into the syrup, then holds it up to a cloth-wrapped candle. A faint flame dances, releasing a smoky scent. Warm, bitter, and slightly floral. It curls in the air like ink in water. You feel its effect almost immediately. Your thoughts slow. Your pulse doesn't quicken, but it deepens somehow, like a drumbeat growing distant. He tells you about patients who came in desperate for relief from their pain, physical or otherwise. For them, he'd prepare a sleep draft, a mixture of poppy extract, honey, and mulled wine, heated gently until thick. A spoonful, if you value your breath, he warns, handing you a tiny ceramic cup filled with something dark and glossy. You sniff it. It smells like earth and smoke, with a trace of sweetness underneath. This wasn't about getting high in the modern sense. The goal was sleep, silence, forgetting. But the line between medicine and escape was so thin it barely existed. 1 dose to dull a toothache, 2 doses to forget a lost child, 3 doses to drift somewhere beyond the veil, and maybe not return. He shows you a drawer filled with dried henbane leaves, another with powdered mandrake root, each known to cause vivid hallucinations if prepared improperly. The church, he says, prefers we call these poisons now. He smiles wryly. But even saints lose sleep. You sip from the tiny cup. Just a touch. The taste is bitter and thick, clinging to your tongue like resin. You sit down on a stool that wobbles under you, feeling a hush settle over your thoughts. Your limbs feel heavier, but your mind begins to drift. Not upward, not outward, just sideways. A quiet moment passes. You notice the apothecary isn't writing anymore. He's watching the flame flicker on the table. For a man surrounded by potions, he looks deeply, achingly tired. People think these mixtures are made for wild visions, he murmurs, but really, most just want peace, even if it's only for an hour. You wonder how many came through that little wooden door seeking relief and left with something far more complicated. How many fell asleep and dreamed of better lives? How many never woke up? Historians still argue whether apothecaries knowingly push such substances for pleasure or if their hands were forced by demand. Some records suggest they operated in a gray area, publicly offering cures, privately crafting dreams. Others argue the church kept them just close enough to use, but far enough to blame. You glance back at the shelf marked, "Not for common use." Your eyes rest on a small bundle tied with silk thread, white powder sealed inside a wax pouch. The apothecary notices your gaze again and shakes his head slowly. "That one's not for drifting," he says. "That one's for never coming back." The moment sobers you. A little breeze from a hidden window cools your cheek. The candle's flame flickers. Time folds in the room like a breath held in the dark. You stand. Your knees feel strange, not weak, just loosened. The apothecary doesn't ask questions. He simply takes the cup from your hand and places it in a basin. You don't speak, neither does he. As you step back out into the early night, the door creaks softly behind you. The lantern still sways gently above your head, but the air feels heavier now, as if it's pressing close to your skin, reminding you that you've touched something old, potent, and sacred. You walk down the stone path with careful steps. The sky has turned indigo, and the first star peeks out between drifting clouds. Your breath is slow, your heart beats steady. You feel not high, exactly, but untethered, as if the world has released its grip on your shoulders, just enough to let you float. Whatever secrets were kept on that upper shelf, you suspect they were not so much hidden as waiting. The path from the apothecary fades behind you as you cross a narrow bridge over a shallow stream, the water dark and quiet under moonlight. In the distance, a low stone wall surrounds a quiet complex. A bell tower rises modestly into the night sky, its silhouette framed by the pale shimmer of stars. You recognize the structure, a monastery, plain and still, tucked into the folds of the countryside like a secret meant to be half forgotten. You pass through an arched gate. No one stops you. No one asks your name. The heavy wooden door to the main hall stands ajar, creaking softly in the wind. You slip inside. Candlelight pools across stone floors. The scent of beeswax and old incense lingers, softened by cool air and the faint musk of parchment. You hear footsteps, measured, padded in leather, echoing faintly through the cloister. Then, silence again. You walk past wooden benches, past manuscripts written in script so tight it looks like thread. One page lays open beside a flickering candle. It depicts a plant, gnarled, pale roots twisting like limbs. A label beneath it reads, Mandragora officinarum, mandrake. You've heard of it before, stories that warn of its scream when uprooted, of its power to curse or cure. But here, it is drawn with reverence, annotated with delicate notes, not warnings, but instructions. A robed monk enters the hall, nods at you, and glides down a corridor. You follow, curious. He says nothing, but leaves the door open behind him. You step into a small chamber lined with shelves. Jars and bundles fill every surface. Books wrapped in linen, glass vials glowing faintly in the dim light. On the central table, a mortar sits half full of pale root shavings. The monk pours a thin liquid over it, wine by the scent, and stirs slowly with a carved wooden rod. The mixture smells strange, earthy and sharp, like fresh-cut roots soaked in vinegar. You wrinkle your nose slightly. Mandrake tea, he says softly. His voice is warm, barely louder than a whisper. Not for waking minds. You sit on a bench against the wall, watching as he pours the mixture through a fine cloth into a ceramic cup. He doesn't offer it to you. He simply places it on the altar, beside a simple wooden cross and a candle that is nearly burned to its base. This one is for Brother Anselm, he says. He hasn't slept in 4 nights. Grief weighs on him like armor. You learn, in quiet conversation, that monks occasionally turn to mandrake when prayer alone couldn't bring peace. Carefully prepared, it calmed the heart, softened the mind, and opened strange doors and dreams. Visions would come, not nightmares, but messages, symbols, sometimes music, occasionally voices. The monks didn't seek euphoria, they sought answers, and sometimes just rest. Outside, an owl calls once, low and distant. The monk tells you that mandrake was never used lightly. It was as sacred as it was feared. Too much, and a man might fall into a sleep he couldn't wake from. Too little, and the visions wouldn't come. The preparation required focus, silence, and, above all, a reason. He shows you a text, written in Latin and illuminated with gentle colors. It describes a ritual used in winter. Fast for 1 day. Prepare the mandrake with red wine and honey. Anoint the temples and sleep facing east. Some monks believed it invited divine dreams, visions of the Holy Spirit, of ancestors, of long-dead saints. You wonder whether the visions were real, or just the flowering of tired minds and flickering candlelight. But something in the monk's tone suggests it didn't really matter. The soul knows when it's listening, he says, placing a linen cloth over the cooling cup. Historians still argue whether monastic orders approved of these methods or quietly tolerated them. Officially, the church often condemned mind-altering plants as pagan tools, but quietly, behind cloister walls. Exceptions were made, not for pleasure, but for clarity, for rest, for mercy. You notice a small drawer carved into the wall. The monk opens it and reveals a carefully wrapped root, pale and shriveled, shaped eerily like a little person. Its limbs twist unnaturally, its head bulbous and ridged. You feel a strange pull looking at it, as though it remembers things it never lived. This one, he says, was buried under a fig tree for a season before harvest. We let it sleep before it helped others do the same. He wraps it again and returns it to its drawer. Some say it speaks when you grind it, he adds, almost smiling. I've never heard it, but I always listen. You ask if he's ever tried the tea himself. He nods once, almost shyly. Once, during a winter of great silence, I heard music that did not come from the chapel, bells without clappers. A voice that told me to open a window. I did. There was nothing there. But I slept that night. I slept for 10 hours straight. It was enough. The air in the room feels heavier now, scented with candle smoke and old stone. You sit quietly as the monk extinguishes the nearly spent flame. The darkness feels soft rather than empty. You wonder how many dreams were born here, how many broken spirits found temporary peace in the gentle fog of mandrake. How many monks walked into those dreams never intending to escape, and how many woke up changed. You thank him without words and step into the corridor once more. The night has deepened, the stars are brighter, or perhaps your eyes are simply slower now. Each step feels deliberate, softened by thought. As you leave through the monastery gate, you glance back. The bell tower stands quiet against the sky. You think you hear a low hum from inside, a hymn, perhaps, or the fading notes of a dream still echoing through the stones. And even though you never tasted the mandrake tea, your mind feels slightly loosened, as though a part of you brushed up against someone else's vision, someone long gone, but not entirely silent. You continue along a narrow cart path, the cobblestones worn smooth by time and hooves, your feet brushing through tufts of grass growing between the stones. The monastery fades behind you, its quiet mystery still lingering in your chest like a scent you can't quite name. The night air is damp now, and the wind brings whispers, tree branches rubbing together, the distant bleat of a goat, the occasional creak of something too quiet to place. Soon, you reach a village that seems asleep but watchful. No lanterns burn in the windows, yet you feel as though someone, or something, is peering from behind shutters. A black cat darts across the road. Your boots crunch over dry leaves. You hesitate as the woods return. Darker now, but not empty. The clearing ahead is lit faintly by a pale fire. Not a bonfire, not even a hearth, but a controlled flicker. Deliberate. Around it, 3 women crouch low. Their hoods are down, hair braided, sleeves rolled, hands busy grinding, stirring, whispering. They don't startle when you step forward. One looks up, her eyes reflecting the firelight, calm as a moonlit pond. She gestures silently for you to sit. You do. A thick wooden bowl rests in the center of a circle scratched into the dirt. The air smells strongly of ash, rosemary, and something metallic. From a pouch, one woman adds a grayish powder. Another crushes belladonna berries into a paste. The third grates the bark of an unknown root, curled, red, and resinous. They are making an ointment, and not just any balm for bruises or fevers. This one is meant for travel, of the strangest kind. She dips 2 fingers into the mix and smears it onto the inside of her arm. The second woman does the same, behind her knee. The third lifts her hem and dabs it across the tops of her feet. You watch, unsure whether to be fascinated or quietly terrified. One of them leans in close, her voice like dry leaves brushing stone. "For flying," she says. The air thickens. Not with smoke, but with the weight of what you're seeing. You've heard the stories, the ones passed down in whispers and firelight tales. Witches who flew through the night sky on broomsticks, who gathered at crossroads, danced in circles, and cast spells under moonlight. But now, sitting here, you realize something else. The flying wasn't physical, at least not in the way you imagined. It wasn't about speed or altitude. It was about escaping the ground, escaping everything. The mixture they're using, commonly called flying ointment, was made from plants known to both heal and harm: belladonna, henbane, datura, mandrake. Together, they could induce a trance-like state, vivid visions, even out-of-body experiences. When absorbed through the skin, especially in thin, warm areas, it bypassed digestion, going straight to the bloodstream. The sensation, disconnection, lightness, the illusion, or truth, depending on whom you ask, of flight. Historians still argue whether these ointments were actually used by self-proclaimed witches, or whether the stories came from confessions under torture. Some claim the recipes were passed through midwives and wise women as a kind of folk medicine. Others suggest they were misunderstood, painted as wicked simply because they existed outside church control. You lean closer to the fire, its warmth low and flickering. One of the women closes her eyes, her breathing slow and shallow. Her fingers twitch, her lips move without sound. The others follow, no one speaks. Their faces soften, blank but serene. You don't know what they're seeing, but their bodies seem unanchored, not limp but loose, like marionettes dreaming they have no strings. One hand reaches for yours, gently, not to pull you in, but to invite. You don't apply the ointment. You don't have to. The moment is enough. You sit in the hush of the clearing, feeling the weight of history, of how women who dared to gather like this, to experiment with herbs and the unknown, were often feared, hunted, condemned, not because they harmed others, but because they held knowledge. Quiet, untamed knowledge, and knowledge, especially when not controlled, frightened people more than any spell ever could. The woman who touched your hand opens her eyes. They're distant, glassy, but focused. She looks not at you, but through you. "He's coming," she whispers, her voice so faint you're not sure she meant to speak aloud. She doesn't clarify. Then she smiles. Not with fear, not with mischief, with peace. You wonder what she saw. Was she flying, dancing in the air above the trees, meeting someone long gone, or simply floating in a place where nothing hurts? You realize, sitting there, that this too was a form of healing, a way to soothe what couldn't be soothed otherwise. When grief was too heavy, when justice was nowhere to be found, when love was lost and the world made no sense, there were herbs, and there were women who knew how to use them. Of course, they were rarely called healers. More often, they were branded heretics, witches, sinners. The church's courts burned many for practices that weren't all that different from the monk's mandrake tea or the apothecary's sleeping syrup. But gender, power, and fear have always twisted definitions. The fire crackles softly. One woman stirs, blinking slowly. Another hums a low, melodic tune, barely audible. The third is already asleep, her head resting on a folded cloth. You rise quietly. Your legs feel light, as though the air itself lifts them. You feel neither fear nor pity, only reverence. Whatever the ointment did, it left behind stillness, a kind of hush you can feel inside your bones. You glance up at the trees. Their branches sway against the stars. And for a moment, you could swear something moved between them. Not a bird, not wind, something unseen but certain. You walk back toward the path. Behind you, the fire dims, the circle softens into darkness, the forest breathes again, and somewhere, deep in your chest, a part of you wonders, what would it feel like to fly, not to rise, not to soar, but to leave everything behind, just long enough to return changed? You leave the forest behind with the scent of herbs still clinging to your sleeves, the image of flickering eyes and silent visions lingering in your mind. The path widens as you reach the edge of a village where the houses cluster close together like gossiping hens. Thatched roofs glow under the moonlight, and from one long wooden hall at the village center, you hear laughter, low, rolling, familiar. Music spills out, lute strings, a steady drum, voices rising in chorus. You follow the warmth and sound until you reach the doorway. Inside, the feasting hall is alive. Candles flicker in iron holders nailed to beams. Fire roars in a stone hearth, crackling and sending occasional sparks flying into the smoky air. You step into the heat, the smell of roasted meat and freshly baked rye bread hitting you all at once. Dozens of villagers fill the space, sitting shoulder to shoulder at long tables. Clay mugs clink. Platters pass from hand to hand. Someone spills ale and barely notices. You find an empty stool and settle in. The warmth wraps around you like a blanket, but something else hovers in the air, not just the scent of food and sweat and wood smoke, but a thickness. You notice bundles of dried herbs smoldering slowly in baskets near the fire. A sweet, spicy haze floats upward. You lean closer. Is that thyme or marjoram? Maybe lavender? No, something else too. Something stronger. You inhale again. Your shoulders sink. An old woman beside you chuckles and nudges your arm. You'll sleep like a babe. Love, she says, teeth missing, eyes sharp. Sage and valerian root, good for the nerves, and for keeping quarrels quiet after too much drink. She's not wrong. The longer you sit, the softer the room feels. Laughter no longer bursts, it hums. Music melts instead of dances. Every clatter is muffled, as though the walls have padded themselves in smoke and honey. You realize this isn't accidental. The feast is not just a celebration. It's a ritual of release. A communal exhale. The food is rich but grounding. Stewed vegetables, fatty cuts, grains soaked in mead. The drink flows freely, but nothing is served straight. Even the ale has been steeped with herbs. One man holds up his cup and lists the ingredients like a charm: hops, nettle, woodruff, and a whisper of yarrow. For dreams, he says, and for loosened thinking. It strikes you how cleverly it's done. No one would call it getting high. That's not the language they use, but the result is the same. The edge comes off the world, and for one night, the aches of the body, the worries of tomorrow, and the feuds from last harvest all dissolve into a fragrant haze. You lift your own mug. The drink is cloudy, golden, lightly bitter. There's something in it you can't name. Maybe mugwort. You've read that it sharpens dreams, helps you remember them like stories told in the morning fog. At the far end of the hall, a minstrel begins a new song, one that loops and rises in slow circles. A woman next to him sways, eyes half-lidded, her head resting on a stranger's shoulder. No one minds, no one explains. You catch fragments of old tales being told between bites. A goat that turned into a prince. A forest that changed direction overnight. A star that sang a lullaby to a lost child. You're not sure if the stories are old or if the listeners are simply too hazy to challenge them. Either way, they land like poetry. Historians still argue whether medieval feast halls intentionally used herbal smoke and infused drinks to shift consciousness, or whether it was simply cultural habit. Recipes for spiced meads and ale steeped with wild herbs appear in manuscripts, but their purpose, whether medicinal or mystical, remains blurred. Some say it was tradition. Others suspect it was something far more deliberate. The fire flares, and someone laughs too loudly, clapping a friend on the back. The air swirls again. You glance up and watch the smoke curl into shapes, maybe faces, maybe nothing. Your mind doesn't care to decide. You find yourself lost in the rhythm of it all. The drum keeps playing, not fast, not slow, just steady, a heartbeat for the room. You feel your own heart sink with it, like boats moored on the same tide. The old woman beside you leans over again. "It's not just the drink," she says. "It's the forgetting. That's what they're after." She gestures around the hall. The debt, the harvest, the plague, the wars. Can't carry it every day. So tonight, we lay it down, just for a little while. You nod, you understand. The feast is medicine. Not from the apothecary's shelf or a monk's mortar, but from fire, from laughter, from plants burned without names and songs sung without reason. Someone offers you a bite of something sweet, honey-soaked nuts spiced with anise and fennel. You chew slowly. The flavor is warm, a little sharp, deeply comforting. Your eyes feel heavy, not from exhaustion, but from ease. You think of the flying ointment again, the mandrake tea, the apothecary's syrup. This is different, less focused, more collective, but the goal, in the end, is the same: peace, pause, disconnection from the sharpness of life. A dog wanders between the benches, tail wagging, ignored but welcomed. A man begins to sing alone, off-key but full of heart. His voice wavers, cracks, and somehow everyone joins in, not perfectly, but together. The tune floats, lazy and low, rising through the rafters like a lullaby to the old wood above. You let your eyes close for a moment, and in that moment, you're not you. You're part of a room, a people, a feeling that stretches back hundreds of years. The heat on your cheeks, the hum in your chest, the scent of herbs in your lungs, all of it weaving you into something ancient and soft. When you open your eyes again, the fire has dimmed. The room glows gold and amber. The laughter is slower now, like waves lapping at the shore after a storm. You stand, stretch, and make your way to the door. The cool night air kisses your skin. Behind you, the feast continues, quietly, ahead of you. The path waits, darker now, but gentler too. You walk with a slow, contented step, and the air around you feels like a sigh. The road leaves the village behind in silence, and the merriment of the feast hall fades like smoke into the trees. You walk beneath a sky scattered with soft stars, your thoughts still moving slow and warm, the pace of your body matching the lull in your chest. But soon the landscape shifts. The ground levels, flattens, and the scent in the air changes. Drier now, tinged with distant spices and warm dust. You arrive in a small town nestled in a basin of rolling hills. Stone walls curve like arms around domed buildings, low-roofed homes, and an open courtyard. The language changes on the signs. The alphabet curves more softly, like the folds of fabric rippling in the wind. The moon overhead is brighter here. A call to prayer has long since faded into the quiet, but its echo still seems to hum across the stones. You're drawn toward music, not the raucous kind of village flutes and fiddles, but something deeper, steadier. A drumbeat that seems to pulse with the very air, paired with a low melody that weaves in slow circles, again and again. You pass through an arched gateway into a stone chamber, open to the sky in the center. Lanterns flicker all around the walls, casting golden light on white robes and turning shadows into soft petals. In the center of the room, men stand in a circle. Their heads are bowed, their arms hang loosely at their sides. Their breath is slow. And then, without signal, without command, they begin to spin. Not wildly, not like children in a field. They turn with precision, practiced and poetic. Right hand raised to the sky, left hand lowered toward the earth. Their feet pivot smoothly across the floor. Their robes bloom outward like lilies caught in wind. You are watching the whirling dervishes. This isn't performance, it's prayer. The Sufi order, often misunderstood by outsiders, embraced music, rhythm, and physical motion as a means of spiritual elevation. They didn't seek escape from the world in the way others might. They sought to disappear into the divine, to lose the I entirely, to melt into something eternal, something beyond thought. As you sit quietly along the edge of the chamber, you feel your own breath sinking to the drum's rhythm. Your heartbeat no longer hurries. It circles like theirs. The dervishes keep turning, some for minutes, some longer. They do not falter. Their eyes stay half closed, their faces serene, even as their bodies blur into movement. You learn that this ritual, known as the sema, isn't just a dance, it's a map. The raised hand receives blessings from above. The lowered hand releases them to the earth. The body becomes a conduit. The spinning is not to create dizziness, but to dissolve the self. There are no substances here, no smoke, no roots, no potions. But still, you watch these men drift into a state not unlike the ones you've already seen. Their eyes open, but distant. Their mouths slightly parted. They move with a grace that feels untethered to gravity. Historians still argue whether the trance states reached by Sufi practitioners count as altered consciousness in the same way as chemical-induced states. Some say yes, pointing to the physical signs, the visions described in texts, the long meditative recitations that outlast hunger and sleep. Others insist it's different, a purely spiritual discipline, a devotion so deep it rewires perception without the need for outside agents. You wonder, sitting there, if the difference matters. The musicians change tempo. The drum slows. The melody lowers. The dervishes, still spinning, begin to draw their hands inward, one by one. They return to stillness, not collapsing, but closing, like candles being gently cupped. One kneels, another presses his forehead to the earth. A third opens his eyes and simply smiles, as though he's returned from somewhere that cannot be explained. The guide, a man in a brown robe seated beside you, leans over and says softly, "To empty oneself fully is the greatest intoxication." You glance at him. His face is unlined by worry. His eyes do not sparkle with excitement, but with something steadier. Stillness, the kind that comes after a long storm, or a deep cry, or a night without fear. He tells you of Rumi, the poet mystic who spun verses as the dervishes spin their bodies, each line a step toward the beloved, of how longing and surrender were not weaknesses, but sacred tools. To love, the guide says, is to be drunk without wine. You feel it, too, not a giddy high, not a foggy daze, but something different, a pull inward, a loosening of the self. The room breathes with it. The stone walls seem softer. The sky overhead is ink blue and bottomless. One of the dervishes begins to hum. The note is plain, held steady like a thread. Others join in, not to harmonize, but to blend. The result is a hum that surrounds you, seeps into your bones, fills your lungs not with sound but with silence. You close your eyes, just for a moment. The world spins, not like dizziness, but like orbit, like you're part of a circle, turning gently without resistance. No one claps, no one cheers. When the ritual ends, it ends in hush. The dervishes bow, the room remains still. You stand slowly, not wanting to break the air with sound. As you step back into the courtyard, the breeze greets you like an old friend. You realize you haven't thought about your own name in hours. Not because you forgot it, but because it didn't matter. You carry no potion in your pocket, no trace of herbs on your skin, but you are altered all the same. Whatever happened in that chamber, movement, music, meaning, it lingers. And perhaps that, too, is a kind of high. You look once more at the doorway before walking on. The lanterns dim behind you, and the path unfolds ahead. The stars seem closer now, not above, but within reach. You descend the hill as the stone walls of the town disappear behind you, replaced by wide, open plains bathed in the soft blush of dawn. The horizon glows pale gold, stretching across a landscape so quiet it feels sacred. Your feet crunch over gravel and dry petals. The air is warm already, thick with the sweet scent of flowers, delicate, earthy, and unmistakable. You're in Persia now. The poppy fields spread out before you like a crimson sea, each stalk swaying gently in the breeze, crowned with delicate blossoms of white and red. Bees buzz lazily between them. A narrow path winds through the rows, and you follow it, brushing your fingers along the soft petals, leaving behind tiny streaks of pollen on your skin. In the distance stands a low stone house shaded by pomegranate trees. A poet once lived here, you're told. A scholar. A man who spent his mornings in silence, his afternoons among scrolls, and his evenings with a cup in hand, eyes half-lidded, reciting verses into the night. His name is long gone, but his spirit lingers in the courtyard where cushions still wait in a perfect circle and a worn jug rests on a low table. You sit on one of the cushions. A woman in pale blue robes enters the garden with slow, deliberate steps. She carries a tray with small clay cups and a narrow-necked pot. She nods without speaking and pours a dark, amber liquid into your cup. It smells like spiced honey, but thicker. Beneath the sweetness, you detect something deeper, earthy, bitter, faintly metallic. Opium tea, she says, placing the pot in the center. We sip slowly here. You cradle the cup in your hands, feeling its warmth seep into your palms. All around you, the poppies sway, casting long, rippling shadows across the courtyard tiles. Time slows. This wasn't a secret in Persia. Opium was openly cultivated, processed, and used by mystics, physicians, artists, and commoners alike. It wasn't viewed with fear or shame, but with a kind of poetic reverence. It was known to calm the nerves, to ease pain, and, perhaps most importantly, to expand the mind. The famed poet Hafez is said to have written entire verses under its dreamy influence. Even Avicenna, the great physician, wrote of its uses with equal parts admiration and caution. You sip carefully. The tea coats your tongue, then your throat, leaving behind a warmth that spreads from your chest outward. Not a heat, more like a slow exhale. Your limbs begin to feel distant, as if someone else is moving them gently for you. The breeze seems to deepen. The sound of the poppies rustling grows louder, as if you're hearing through water. Across from you, a man begins to recite. His voice is soft, but each syllable lands with the weight of years. The verses are in Farsi, musical, even though you don't know the language. You understand through rhythm alone. The words rise and fall like breath. A woman joins in, her voice threading through his like vines through stone. You lean back, your eyes half closed, and the courtyard begins to shift. The sky doesn't change color, but it seems closer. The poppies sway slower, as though underwater. The lines of the stone tiles blur gently at the edges, and your thoughts, those busy, flickering birds, go quiet at last. This is not the erratic burst of intoxication. It's not a storm, not a leap. It's a float, a long, unhurried drift through thought and memory. You remember something small, your mother's hands twisting your hair, a song you hummed once when you were afraid of the dark, and it feels impossibly vivid. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of opium in medieval Persia was more medicinal or spiritual. Some say it was merely a remedy that became a habit. Others insist it was a tool of enlightenment, an agent that opened doors to inner landscapes and softened the edges of harsh realities. Neither view is complete. Perhaps that's the point. The woman in blue pours you a second cup, but smaller this time. Too much, she says, and the world dissolves too fast. You nod. You understand. The line between vision and oblivion is thin. She explains that in this place, tea was always part of gathering, but not just any tea. A warm drink was a symbol of rest, of conversation, of shared pause. And when laced with poppy extract, just enough, it became a key, not to escape, but to observe, to settle into the spaces between words. You realize then that many came here not to forget, but to feel more deeply, to unspool their grief slowly, to soften the boundaries between now and then, here and beyond. You lie back on the cushions. Above you, the sky is clear, but you feel as though stars hang just behind it, waiting to show themselves. The sun is higher now, but it does not scald. Everything seems designed for comfort, the kind of comfort that doesn't rescue, but accompanies. A cat curls at your feet, purring so softly it blends with the rustling leaves. Someone begins to sing a lullaby. No words, just sound. You don't know where one voice ends and another begins. You think of the monk with his mandrake tea, the women with their ointments, the dervishes spinning into surrender. This garden is quieter, more languid, but the aim is the same, to step gently out of time, to blur the line between body and soul, and perhaps to write, or dream, or weep without shame. As you begin to drift, a phrase from the recitation lingers in your ear, spoken softly now in your own tongue. Let the world slip. Let it all slip. You do. You don't fall asleep, not quite. You exist in that narrow space just before dreaming, where everything feels true and nothing needs explaining. The tea is worked, not to dazzle you, but to hush you. You are not high. You are deep. And as the petals flutter overhead, like quiet hands waving from another lifetime, you know you'll carry the stillness of this place long after the tea wears off. You wake slowly, not from sleep exactly, but from something more delicate, a state of drifting, of being nowhere and everywhere, like the pause between two long sighs. The poppy garden of Persia is still behind your eyes, a warm imprint on your senses. But the breeze has changed, and the ground beneath you now rumbles faintly with the rhythm of caravan wheels. You're on the Silk Road now. The path stretches wide and shimmering beneath the morning sun, a ribbon of sand and stone cutting through scrub-covered plains. In the distance, caravans trudge forward, camels adorned with tasseled saddles, ox carts creaking under the weight of goods wrapped in colorful cloth, and travelers in layered robes, their faces wrapped against dust. The smell of the road is part spice, part sweat, and part smoke. You follow the column of merchants until the sun begins to tilt westward and the caravan makes camp in a small oasis ringed with short palms. The animals are watered, tents unfurled, and fires sparked from kindling pulled from saddle pouches. Someone brings out a kettle, another opens a sack of dried apricots, and then, like a quiet ritual, a long wooden pipe is passed into view. It's beautifully carved, darkened by years of use. The man holding it wears robes dyed deep indigo. His face is weathered, but his eyes are bright. Eyes that have seen cities rise from the sand and disappear just as quickly. He smiles without words and loads the bowl with something green and resinous. The scent is unmistakable, cannabis. He takes a slow draw, holds it for a heartbeat, then exhales. The smoke drifts upward like a signal to the fading sun. You're invited to join the circle. The pipe passes from hand to hand, everyone taking only what they need, like it's shared air. You accept it. It's warm in your hand, smooth from thousands of palms before yours. You inhale gently. The smoke is grassy and pungent, edged with something sweet. It doesn't hit hard. It unfolds, first in your chest, then behind your eyes, and finally in your thoughts, which stretch out lazily like limbs waking from sleep. No one speaks for a while. The fire crackles. The sun dips lower, washing everything in copper light. A woman with a tambourine taps out a rhythm that has no urgency, only presence. A boy hums beside her, lost in some tune known only to his family. The pipe makes its rounds again, slower this time. No rush. There never is. This isn't indulgence, it's communion. Cannabis along the Silk Road wasn't a secret. It was a companion, used by traders, mystics, and wanderers alike, not just to dull pain or provoke laughter, but to reflect, to stretch the mind during long pauses between destinations, to make sense of stories passed between languages, or simply to help endure the fatigue of miles that never ended. Historians still argue whether cannabis was used primarily as medicine or for spiritual insight during its journey across Asia and the Middle East. Some believe it traveled with Sufi mystics who used it to calm the mind for meditation. Others point to records from India, where hashish was used in sacred rituals, and to regions of Central Asia, where it was steeped into milk and taken before storytelling sessions that could last deep into the night. You're not here for debate. You're here now, under a sky that has begun to shimmer with stars, and the haze that settles in around the campfire feels like a blanket laid gently across your shoulders. The man with the indigo robe speaks softly now, his words meandering like the smoke itself. He tells a story about a trader who once followed a star into the desert and returned with a sack of spices that made men forget their own names. No one knows if it's a metaphor or just a good yarn. No one asks. The pipe passes again. A girl giggles softly. A man hums a verse of poetry, his voice dry but steady. The tambourine returns, not to keep time, but to remind you that time still exists. Barely. You lie back on a folded blanket, the smoke still humming in your chest. The stars overhead no longer twinkle. They breathe. The moon rises slow and golden, and for a moment, you feel completely untethered from the road, from your body, from anything but the rhythm of the night. You think of the monk with his mandrake root, the apothecary's syrup, the spinning dervishes. This is different again. Gentler, earthier, less about transcendence, more about presence. Cannabis. Here is not a tool to fly, but to settle in, to slow down, to sit, to breathe, to listen. A nearby traveler, wrapped in striped shawls, leans toward you and whispers, "The road is long. The mind walks faster than the feet." He lifts the pipe in salute, helps them move together. You nod, you understand. He continues, his voice slow and rhythmic. "We pass this plant like we pass the map. It tells us nothing, but it reminds us to look." Historians don't often write about these campfire rituals. They favor the records of kings and merchants, not the small moments shared under open skies by people with no names left in books. But it's these moments, unwritten, smoky, fragile, that shape just as much of the world as battles and treaties ever did. The fire dims, reduced to glowing coals. Someone sings softly, the melody simple, looping, almost childish. It's the kind of song you'd forget by morning, but remember in your bones. You close your eyes. The sounds of the camp remain. Fire popping, breath passing, footsteps crunching, but they drift further away, like shorelines as you slip into deeper waters. You are not high, you are stilled. And as the pipe makes its final round, passed hand to hand like a prayer whispered across generations, you smile, not because anything has changed, but because you've never noticed how soft the world can be when you're really paying attention. The road waits, but not tonight. Tonight, you rest. The morning sun peaks above the horizon, pale and cold, casting a soft sheen on the dunes of the Silk Road as they shrink behind you. The smoke, the song, the hum of shared breath all fade like a dream with the light. You move steadily northward now, toward a place where the land rises into hills, then mountains, then fjords, the rough, wind-lashed world of the Norse. The sky here is iron gray, the air sharp and bracing, scented with pine, wet stone, and salt from some unseen coastline. You follow a narrow trail up a slope where smoke curls gently from the thatched roof of a longhouse. The path is carved by years of boots and hooves and the dragging weight of firewood. Inside, the hall is dim but welcoming. A central fire crackles beneath an open roof vent, sending ash in slow spirals toward the heavens. Shields line the walls, furs drape the benches. Rough laughter echoes from men and women seated around wooden tables, mugs clutched tight in their hands. A goat bleats softly in the corner, ignored. You take a seat near the hearth. A woman in thick wool sets a horn-shaped cup before you. She fills it with a golden liquid that fizzes faintly at the surface. It smells of honey, spice, and something wild, like damp bark or fermenting berries. You sip it, mead, sweet, potent, warming from within. Then comes the second cup, this one darker, heavier. You're told it's brewed with rye, birch sap, and something else. The man who serves it grins and taps his nose. For battle, he says, his accent thick but friendly, or for dreams. You glance around and notice that not everyone is drinking the same thing. Some cups steam slightly. Others have bits of mushroom floating like leaves. You recognize one of them, a pale red speckled cap, Amanita muscaria, fly agaric, known today for its bright coloring and toxic reputation. But here, in careful hands, it's not just fungus, it's a key. You learn quickly that the Norse, especially certain warriors and shamans, didn't merely drink to celebrate, they drank to change, to become berserkers. The most feared of all Norse fighters were said to consume special brews before battle, infusions that dulled pain, heightened strength, and distorted reality just enough to turn a man into a beast. Or so the stories say. Historians still argue whether berserkers truly use psychoactive substances like fly agaric to enter trance-like rages, or whether the legend was just that, a myth grown wild in the sagas. Some point to consistent descriptions, foaming at the mouth, eyes blazing, voices like thunder. Others note that fly agaric doesn't typically cause aggression, just nausea, visions, and disconnection. Then again, the mind and the story often conspire together to create something entirely new. Tonight, though, you don't see warriors screaming. You see something else. Across the fire, a man begins to chant softly. His words are old, older than most written memory. You don't understand them, but your body reacts. Your spine tingles. Your breath slows. The room leans into his voice. Another horn of mead arrives. This one bears a sprig of something green, bitter smelling. Mugwort? Perhaps. It was used in many places to induce lucid dreams, to open the second sight. You sip again. The warmth pools in your stomach like melted snow. Around you, the mood shifts, not rowdy, not quiet, but stretched. One woman rocks gently on her stool, eyes unfocused, humming under her breath. Another stares into the fire, lips parted slightly, as if she's watching something unfold in the smoke. The chanting rises. You realize it's a tale, an old one, the binding of Fenrir, the wolf, the death of Balder, the end of the world and its rebirth. Each verse falls like a hammer blow softened by rhythm. The listeners don't just hear the story, they feel it, as if they've been pulled inside it. Your thoughts slow again, but not drowsy, more like hollowed, made still, a kind of ready emptiness. You begin to understand why these rituals, these brews, mattered so deeply. In a world ruled by ice and war and the cruel turns of fate, a moment of transformation, however brief, was sacred. One man stands abruptly and walks to the center of the hall. He throws back his head and howls, not in pain, not in jest, but as if answering a call only he can hear. No one laughs, no one speaks. A moment later, he sinks to his knees, presses his forehead to the floor, and exhales so deeply it seems to empty the entire hall. The fire cracks. The wind howls faintly through the roof. You shiver, not from cold, but from awe. You glance down into your cup. The liquid left inside reflects the firelight in shapes that dance and dissolve. You're not sure what's real anymore, but you don't care. You hear someone say softly, "We are closer to the gods like this." Another replies, "Or maybe we become them." It's not about control here. It's about surrender. The Norse did not seek bliss in the way others might. Their rituals were full-bodied, even violent at times. But woven into the violence was a longing for power, yes, but also for understanding, for connection with something vast and terrible and beautiful. Their brews were not escapes. They were doors. You close your eyes, letting the mead settle further into your chest, in your mind. You see wolves and ravens circling the fire. You hear the ocean crashing against distant cliffs. You feel snow melt in your mouth and reform in your lungs. You are not high. You are somewhere else. A liminal space where myth breathes and gods listen. When you open your eyes, the hall is quieter now. Some sleep, some still hum. The chanting has ended. The fire is low. Embers pulse like distant stars. You rise slowly. Your legs feel strong but gentle, like they're walking not on ground but through memory. You nod to the man with the mushroom brew. He nods back with the solemnity of a priest. You step outside into the dark. Cold night. The stars here are sharper than anywhere else. The wind bites, but you don't flinch. Instead, you breathe it in. All of it. The cold, the stories, the lingering hum of transformation. And you continue on. You descend from the rugged northern lands, the frost loosening its grip with each mile. The winds soften, the skies lighten, and the scent of pine and smoke gives way to the perfume of date palms and warm stone. The air is heavy with heat now, thick like syrup, humming with unseen life. Somewhere beyond the desert ridges and river valleys lies a legend, half history, half whisper, told by traders and travelers in hushed tones, a paradise built not of gold or power, but of illusion, and at its center, a garden. You arrive not through gates, but through suggestion. One moment, You walk a dusty trail beside crumbling fort walls, and the next, you're beneath the shade of citrus trees, their branches heavy with fruit, the air pulsing with bird calls and sweet wind. A man in flowing robes sits beside a tiled fountain, tossing breadcrumbs to a parrot whose feathers shimmer like fire. He gestures for you to sit. "Do you know the name of this place?" he asks, voice smooth as sanded stone. Some call it Alamut, others call it something less literal. They call it the Garden of the Hashashin. You've heard of them, the Nizari Ismailis, the so-called assassins. History knows them as shadowy figures, feared by kings and crusaders, climbing castle walls in silence, blades drawn without hesitation. But what you haven't heard, not in the textbooks, is this. They used hashish, or so the stories go. The man offers you a small clay pipe filled with dark, sticky resin. He lights it with a taper, holds the smoke in his lungs, and exhales with closed eyes. The scent is dense, woodsy, herbal, just a hint of bitterness underneath. When he passes the pipe to you, he says only, gently, "This is not for escape, it is for remembering." You take a breath, slow and steady. The smoke creeps through your senses like warm ink in cold water. Your body relaxes before your mind does. The colors around you bloom. The birds' calls stretch out like melodies. Time folds, not into confusion, but into rhythm. The man begins to speak, not in explanation, but in story. He tells of young men taken from villages, brought blindfolded into the garden, given food soaked in pomegranate syrup and resin, wine kissed with spice and smoke. They would awake beneath the trees, surrounded by song and silk, and women who smiled like gods. Here, the legend says, they believed they had died and reached paradise. When they returned to the world, they were fearless, because to die in service meant to return. Historians still argue how much of this tale is truth. Marco Polo repeated it. Crusaders feared it. Scholars debated it. Some say it was propaganda, designed to terrify enemies and mystify allies. Others believe there was a real practice, hashish used not for pleasure, but for ceremony, for transformation. The man shrugs. Maybe it was myth, but myth has teeth. He leans back, watching the leaves overhead shimmer like coins. What matters is what they felt, what they believed. The hashish did not give them strength. It reminded them of something already inside. You listen, the smoke still humming gently in your chest. It's not disorienting, it's soft, like being spoken to in a language you once knew as a child. You understand without needing to interpret. Another figure joins you in the garden, a woman in white robes with hands stained by dye and incense. She brings a tray of dates and cheese, sets it down silently, and sits with her legs tucked under her. She begins to recite poetry, the words flowing in a loop, phrases repeating like mantras, but always slightly changed. Each line is a key, each silence between them, a door. The hashish helps you lean into the words, not to analyze them, but to follow. You feel them move across your skin like wind, settle in your stomach like heat. You don't need to know what they mean to know what they do. This is not euphoria. This is not escape. This is focus turned inward, like a mirror placed not before your face, but inside your mind. You ask softly, "Was this truly how they trained the assassins?" The man smiles. "Trained," he repeats. "No, they remembered who they were, and once remembered, they would do anything." You wonder if fearlessness truly can be taught, or if it must be uncovered. Perhaps substances like hashish, in careful hands, in sacred places, allowed people to touch something beyond fear. Not because it erased danger, but because it reminded them that life and death were simply points on the same line. You close your eyes, you're in the garden still, but you also aren't. You're standing on a high rooftop with a blade in your hand, the wind in your ears and your heart quiet in your chest. You are in a tent by the fire, whispering secrets to an old friend. You are lying on a woven mat, your fingers tracing patterns in tile. You are alone, and you are not alone. The hashish carries you, not like a river, but like breath. It does not force, it allows. When you open your eyes again, the man is gone. The woman, too, only the parrot remains, perched now on the fountain's edge, staring at you with one bright eye. You rise. The garden has shifted. The trees cast longer shadows. The colors are warmer now, as if painted with brushstrokes instead of light. You walk toward the arched gate at the far end and pass beneath it. You don't look back. The story of the Hashashin will continue long after you leave. It will be shaped and reshaped by those who fear it, romanticize it, deny it. But tonight, you carry only the feeling of the garden, not its facts, not its legend, its stillness, its slowness, its certainty. You continue on, the taste of smoke still in your mouth, the weight of ancient conviction soft in your lungs. You walk out of the garden as if emerging from a dream, the air cooling gently around you. The smoke thins, the wind picks up, and the dry earth gives way to silt and reeds. Somewhere in the distance, a river sighs its endless path through the desert. The sound is wide, low, and slow, as if the land itself is exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. You've come to the Nile. The river glints beneath the sun like braided silk. Palm trees sway along the banks. Their shadows stretch thin across golden sand. Crocodiles drift just beneath the surface, silent, ancient. Papyrus stalks rise tall, bowing in the breeze, and nestled in the bend of the water is a cluster of stone buildings, weather-worn and half swallowed by green. You approach on a narrow path carved into the earth by sandals and time. A low chant echoes softly through the open halls, voices layered and distant, more tone than word. You step into a courtyard where painted pillars rise like flower stems, each crowned with blue and gold. Beneath their shade, a basin of still water sits filled with floating blossoms, vivid blue petals, each unfolding like the sky caught in bloom. Blue lotus. The flower was sacred here. In ancient Egypt, it wasn't just decoration, it was symbol, offering, medicine, and mystery. And, as you're about to discover, it was also a gateway. A priestess steps into view. Her gown is linen, light and pleated, her arms adorned with cuffs of gold. She carries a small tray, 2 cups, a pitcher, and a bundle of fresh blue lotus flowers wrapped in damp cloth. She kneels beside you without a word and begins to steep the petals in warm water. The scent is soft and strange, not heavy like hashish, not pungent like poppy. It's subtle, almost floral, almost citrus, with a trace of sweetness that stirs something gentle and nostalgic in your chest. You breathe in, and your shoulders drop. Your hands unclench, your thoughts slow. She offers you one of the cups. The liquid inside is pale amber tinged with blue. You sip. The taste is light, floral, barely there, but it carries a heaviness that doesn't come from the flavor. It comes from somewhere deeper. The priestess speaks finally, her voice like silk sliding through water. The lotus opens the heart, she says, and softens the veil between waking and the world beneath. You sit beneath the painted pillars and sip again. Blue lotus was revered by the ancient Egyptians not just for its beauty, but for its effects. Mixed with wine, brewed as tea, or even inhaled through incense, it was said to promote euphoria, mild trance, and vivid dreams. In artwork, the flower appears again and again, tucked into the hands of deities, held at the noses of nobles, blooming from the mouths of the dead. Some scholars believe it was used in funerary rites to ease the passage between life and afterlife. Others say it was simply a gentle pleasure, reserved for banquets and lovers. But more than one ancient text suggests something deeper, a flower that brought clarity through calm, intimacy through softness. You lean back against the cool stone. The chant continues, drifting through the hall like smoke through sunlight. The edges of the world begin to blur, not dissolve, not distort, but blend. Light seems thicker, sounds feel slower. You're still here, entirely, but not quite only here. The priestess plucks a lotus blossom from the basin and places it behind your ear. You are not meant to fly, she says, only to float. And that's exactly how it feels. You're buoyed by your own breath, drifting gently inside your own awareness, not lost in thought, but inside it. The way a pearl lives inside an oyster, still, hidden, humming. Historians still argue whether the psychoactive properties of Blue Lotus were strong enough to induce visions, or if its power lay in its context, combined with ritual, rhythm, and sacred stillness. Some say the flower was mostly symbolic, an emblem of rebirth and divine order. Others point to first-hand accounts, ancient recipes, and recent studies suggesting real, measurable effects. But here, now, it doesn't matter, because this moment, this warm stillness, this soft awareness, feels real, feels enough. The priestess sets down her cup and begins to hum. You join without meaning to, your voice slipping between breath and tone, a melody that rises and falls like the Nile itself, like the rhythm of oars dipping into water. You close your eyes, and you see nothing, but you feel everything. The movement of time, the pulse of the river, the soft brush of the lotus petals against your cheek. You feel the echo of every hand that ever held this flower in prayer, in ceremony, in simple, quiet joy. It is not a trance. It is a gentle clarity, a softening of all the hard lines. You stay there for what feels like a long time, or maybe no time at all. When you open your eyes, the sky has shifted. The shadows are longer. The petals in the basin float a little lower in the water, as if they too have grown heavy with stillness. The priestess gathers the cups, her movements fluid, ritualistic. She bows her head, and you return the gesture. No words are needed. You stand and step back into the corridor, the sun golden now on the stone floor. Outside, the river waits, broad, steady, ancient. You walk slowly toward it, every step deliberate, as though your body now understands something your mind has yet to name. You think of all the others, those who spun, who drank, who smoked, who whispered, and here, in the land of the lotus, there is no push, no frenzy, only quiet opening. And perhaps that's the highest state of all. You reach the river's edge and dip your fingers into the cool current. The water swirls gently around your hand, and for a brief moment, it feels like the river is humming a tune only you can hear. You listen, and then you move on. The Nile recedes behind you like a fading dream, its steady rhythm still pulsing faintly in your blood. You follow it eastward, across deserts and mountains, until the terrain shifts again. Lush forests rise like soft waves. Mist clings to the hills, and narrow paths snake through bamboo groves that whisper with every breeze. The air here smells different, sweet pine, damp stone, and the subtle sharpness of minerals pulled from deep within the earth. You've arrived in ancient China, high in the hills, nestled between cliffs and clouds, sits a temple compound carved from stone and softened by centuries of moss. Red banners flutter from tiled roofs. A line of monks passes silently through the mist, robes brushing the ground, but your path veers away from their quiet rituals, toward a smaller structure, older and half hidden by time. Inside, a man crouches near a fire pit, his long beard stained with ash, his eyes sharp beneath drooping lids. Scattered around him are bowls filled with strange powders, twisted roots, bits of bone, and glass bottles sealed with wax. Symbols cover the walls, dragons, stars, flowing lines that curve like breath. The air smells of sulfur and sweetness, metal and jasmine. Nothing feels accidental. This is not a monastery. This is a laboratory. And the man before you is an alchemist. He doesn't speak at first. He simply gestures to a low stool across from him and begins grinding something into a fine dust using a mortar the size of a melon. The mixture sparkles faintly in the light. He adds a spoonful of mercury. Yes, mercury. Then stirs in a viscous oil, thick and dark like molasses. The liquid swirls, golden and ominous. You watch, fascinated and unsettled. He pours the mixture into a crucible and places it into the glowing coals. A thick steam rises immediately, smelling of cinnamon and iron. He leans forward, inhaling carefully. His eyelids flutter. He smiles faintly. You learn, gradually, that you've stumbled into the realm of the Taoist alchemists, seekers of immortality, harmony, and the secrets of heaven. Their path wasn't paved with prayer, but with transformation. They believed that consuming, or sometimes just inhaling, specific combinations of minerals and plants could refine not just the body, but the spirit. Gold, mercury, cinnabar, and jade were ingredients not for wealth, but for eternal balance. The elixir he's crafting is not meant for healing. It's meant to break through, to reach the great way. And though many died chasing it, others swore they saw the universe more clearly in its wake. The alchemist finally speaks, his voice gravelly but smooth. To live forever, he says, one must first dissolve completely. You aren't offered a vial or a sip, not yet. First, he leads you outside to a stone bench near a pond thick with lily pads and slow-moving koi. He hands you a scroll. On it, a series of breathing techniques and postures, each one named after elements: earth, fire, water, wind, void. You must balance before you taste, he says. You follow the instructions. Inhale, hold, exhale, move slowly, like ink sinking through paper. The world stills, your chest opens, your skin tingles. When you return to the lab, the crucible has cooled. He hands you a tiny ceramic cup filled with the thinnest layer of silvery liquid. It smells metallic, but not unpleasant, like rain on stone. You hesitate. He nods, just once. You drink. The taste is cold and sweet, then bitter, then sharp. Your throat tightens for a moment, then relaxes. Heat climbs your spine slowly, like steam rising through bamboo. Your vision sharpens, then softens, then sharpens again. It's not euphoric. It's aligned. As if someone has tugged all the crooked lines inside you into place. You feel heavy and light at once, aware, yet deeply removed. The alchemist begins to chant softly, fingers moving in mudras, shaping energy from air. The symbols on the wall seem to glow faintly. You close your eyes. You're not gone, but you're not here either. You're walking through a garden where every leaf is vibrating. You're floating through a scroll painting where rivers flow upward and dragons sleep curled in mountains. You hear your own name spoken in a language you've never learned. You feel the pulse of the stars inside your ribs. Historians still argue whether Taoist elixirs truly induced altered states, or whether their effects were exaggerated, romanticized, or entirely spiritual. Many point to the dangers: mercury poisoning, insanity, death. Others suggest the alchemical process wasn't just physical, but symbolic, a metaphorical transformation of the self through trial, discipline, and refinement. But whatever the truth, you can feel the echo of something ancient stirring in your blood, something not quite human, something timeless. When you open your eyes, the fire has gone out. The alchemist sits quietly, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. The air feels cleaner, lighter. The smoke is gone, but its memory lingers. He opens his eyes. "You will not live forever," he says gently. "But you will understand why so many tried." You nod, not because you fully understand, but because you're beginning to. The elixir wasn't about never dying. It was about touching the eternal, even if only for a moment, feeling the divine wheel turn once more beneath your feet. And in that brief spin, recognizing your place in it, not at the center, but as part of its flow. You thank him in silence and step back into the courtyard. The koi still drift beneath the lilies. The wind rustles the pine. Nothing has changed, except you. You take one last breath of the mountain air and begin your descent. The mist parts for you like a curtain, soft and forgiving. And as you walk, the world feels not lighter or heavier, but somehow more precise, as if each leaf, each stone, each heartbeat has been placed exactly where it should be. You leave the mountain mists behind, descending into lowlands threaded with narrow roads and slow rivers. The sky grows heavier now, thick with clouds the color of pewter, hanging low over rolling fields. The scent of pine and resin fades, replaced by damp wool, peat smoke, and the distant tang of iron. You're back in Europe, in the late Middle Ages, where the world stumbles forward between plague and prayer, and healing is equal parts miracle and guesswork. Your path brings you to a small stone building tucked beside a crumbling church. The roof sags under the weight of years. A wooden sign sways on its post, too weather-worn to read. But the symbol carved above the door is unmistakable, a simple cross, ringed with a laurel, a medieval hospital. You step inside. The air is warm and close, filled with the scent of vinegar, old herbs, and something floral that almost masks the blood. The space is dim, lit by slivers of light slipping through high, narrow windows. Rows of straw-filled cots line the walls. Some are occupied, most are silent. At the far end of the room, a nun in gray robes kneels beside a patient, whispering softly. Her hands move with slow confidence, wringing cloth, adjusting bandages, stroking a forehead. You approach an apothecary's table near the wall, cluttered with jars, copper pots, and stained wooden spoons. Another nun works there, carefully adding drops of dark liquid into a steaming pot. She glances up and nods toward a stool. You sit. On the table rests a bundle of dried poppy heads, their husks hard and rattle-thin. Crushed petals are scattered like crimson confetti. You recognize the smell, rich, earthy, vaguely sweet. This is not your first encounter with Papaver somniferum. The nun stirs the pot and explains in a hushed voice. "We make dwale." You've heard the term. Dwale was a medieval sleeping potion, used to sedate patients before surgeries, or simply to grant them rest when pain became too much. The ingredients varied from region to region, but poppy was nearly always included, along with henbane, lettuce juice, bile, vinegar, and sometimes even wine. She ladles the mixture into a small cup and carries it across the room to a man moaning softly in his sleep. His face is pale and slick with sweat. He drinks without resistance. You stay seated as she returns and resumes her work. Another nun lights a bundle of dried herbs, sage, maybe, or rosemary, and waves the smoke gently over the table, muttering Latin under her breath. You learn that they brew small batches daily, just enough for the worst cases, too little and it's ineffective, too much and it stills the breath entirely. There's no measuring spoon, no guarantee, only instinct, experience, and prayer. You glance at a manuscript propped against the wall, faded ink, smudged by fingers. It lists the virtues of poppy, to dull the ache of teeth, to quiet the tremors of fever, to bring down the rising madness of melancholy. But below the blessings, there's a warning. Take heed. For the flower is a jealous nurse, gentle with one hand and strangling with the other. The nun offers you a sip of the cool tea. Not much, just enough to taste. It's bitter, deep, not like the poppy syrup from Persia. This is earthier, grittier. It tastes like root and rot and something strangely comforting. It's not meant to delight. It's meant to endure. Your fingers tingle slightly. Your breath evens. You feel your pulse slow, not dangerously, but noticeably. Everything around you sharpens, then softens. Sounds become muffled, then crystal clear. The candlelight seems thicker. Shadows stretch farther. You close your eyes, and in that brief moment, you understand why this potion mattered, not just for surgery, but for mercy. When pain was constant, when rest would not come, when fever stole the mind, Dwale was not an escape. It was an offering. Historians still argue about its safety. Some say the concoction was reckless, deadly. Others believe it was carefully measured and administered by those who understood its limits. Medieval texts are scattered with recipes, all slightly different, all lacking precise measurement. What they do agree on is the intention: to ease suffering, to give the body a chance to breathe without pain. You open your eyes again, and the room hasn't changed, but it feels quieter, slower, as though the world is moving through honey. The moaning man across the room is finally asleep. The nun covers him gently with a worn blanket. Another patient coughs, and the nurse moves to his side. Her hands never rush. Her voice never rises. She works with the grace of someone who has seen too many suffer and decided not to flinch anymore. You look again at the poppy bundle. In this place, it is neither cure nor curse. It is a tool, a temporary kindness. The nun speaks to you again, this time softer. Pain is a teacher, she says. But sometimes, even the best teachers must be dismissed. You rise from the stool. Your limbs feel warm and strangely weightless. You are not high. You are simply gentled. As you step outside into the late afternoon, the air feels cooler, fresher. The clouds have thinned slightly, allowing threads of light to spill over the chapel roof. A bell rings in the distance, soft, round, fading. You walk on, the taste of Dwale still lingering faintly on your tongue. Not sweet, not bitter, something in between. And you carry with you the quiet knowledge that even in a world of chaos and plague and uncertainty, there were those who tried, who boiled roots and flowers by candlelight, hoping to steal a few hours of peace from the jaws of pain. And sometimes they succeeded. You leave the hospital behind, the scent of poppy and vinegar still faint in your hair, and follow a winding lane that curves through a grove of silent oaks. The branches arch overhead like the ribs of a cathedral, dappling the path with patches of shade and light. The clouds above break and reform, stirring gold and gray together in the sky. Your feet find the rhythm again, steady, unhurried. The body softened by Dwale, the mind alert but floating. You've been through gardens, forests, feast halls, and temples, but now the trail leads somewhere in between, neither sacred nor profane. Both. You reach a clearing at last, where two buildings stand opposite each other, separated by a wide field of heather. On one side, a modest stone chapel with stained glass windows glowing dully in the evening light. On the other, a thatched roof cottage with carved wooden beams and a crude circle of stones nearby. Both seem ancient, both hum with memory. You enter the chapel first. Inside, rows of pews stretch toward a simple altar. Beeswax candles burn low. The scent is familiar: wine, smoke, and old incense baked into the wood. You sit near the back. A priest in a pale robe steps forward, silent but not solemn. He places a silver cup upon the altar and begins to prepare the Eucharist. The wine is dark red, nearly black in the candlelight. He pours it with slow care, as though the liquid itself is sacred, and to him it is. He lifts the chalice, speaks the words you've heard before, words of transformation, of body and blood, and then drinks. You watch as the wine touches his lips, not in haste, not in thirst, but in reverence. When he lowers the cup, his eyes close. For a moment, he is still. Then he breathes deeply, as though the act of drinking has pulled him somewhere inward. You've heard it said that the wine in the Christian Mass is symbolic, but that's only part of the truth. In medieval Europe, especially among mystics, saints, and those burdened with unbearable faith, the wine was not only a symbol, it was a portal, a soft veil, a way to taste the divine in the most earthly form. Historians still debate whether the wine used in Mass ever held psychoactive qualities, fortified with herbs or altered with infusions. Most say no. But there are records of small monastic orders adding wormwood, hyssop, even blue lotus to their communion wine, not to intoxicate, but to deepen the state of grace, to soften the edge between the human and the holy. You leave the chapel quietly, the flicker of the chalice still dancing behind your eyes. Outside, the light is dimmed further. You walk slowly across the field toward the cottage. As you approach, the scent changes. Less refined, more primal. Fermentation, yeast, wood smoke, and fruit left too long in the sun. A group is gathered near the stone circle. They wear simple cloaks, their hands wrapped around earthen cups. Someone pours from a jug wrapped in vines. The drink glows faintly amber. You're handed a cup, no words, just a nod. You sip. It's thick and sweet. Mead, most likely. But this batch is richer, spiced with something herbal. Maybe mugwort again. Maybe something more obscure. It tastes like a forest dreaming of fire. A woman begins to sing, not loudly, not with precision, but with heart. Her voice cracks on the high notes. No one minds. Another joins her, then another. Soon, the group sways together, voices rising in a song that doesn't quite rhyme, doesn't quite resolve, but still feels whole. You learn that this, too, is ritual, long before cathedrals in Latin, long before wine was holy in a gilded cup. People gathered beneath trees and drank fermented honey or berry wine in honor of the seasons, the moon, the dead, the gods. The drink wasn't incidental. It was essential. It opened the heart, loosened the tongue, invited the unseen. You sit with them as the song turns to laughter. The fire crackles. Someone drops dried herbs into the flames, releasing a puff of fragrant smoke, rosemary and sweet woodruff. Maybe. The flames jump. You blink. The woman beside you leans in and murmurs, "It's not about forgetting. It's about remembering a way of seeing." And you do begin to see how sacredness can ferment just like fruit, how holiness can bubble and fizz and sting the throat before softening into warmth, whether in a chalice of consecrated wine or a shared jug of spiced mead. Alcohol has always served more than intoxication. It has served presence. In the chapel, it was order. In the grove, it is flow. You close your eyes, and in that moment, you see both, stained glass and flickering firelight, a hymn and a howl, a priest lifting a chalice and a woman pouring from a wooden cup. One speaks Latin, the other sings in syllables no one wrote down, but both are praying. Historians still argue about the line between sacred and profane, about when a substance becomes sinful, or when it becomes holy. But as you sit in this dusk, held by a warmth that is part drink, part music, part memory, the line feels imaginary. The cup in your hand is empty now, but your limbs are loose, your thoughts smooth. You don't feel drunk, you feel tuned, like a string tightened just enough to hum. Someone throws more wood on the fire. Sparks rise like blessings. You think of the poppy tea, the mandrake brews, the dervish spins, the blue lotus blooming under ancient stars. And you realize each culture, each ritual, whether in a stone chapel or a wild grove, is chasing the same thing. The gentle unraveling of the ordinary self, not to escape, but to touch something deeper, to remember, for a moment, what it feels like to be connected, fully, fiercely, kindly. You rise, the firelight behind you, and begin walking once more. The sky is indigo now, stars waking like old friends. The world is quiet, but inside, you are singing. And the song doesn't need words. The path narrows again, winding through thickets of hawthorn and hedgerow, your breath visible now in the cooling night. The warmth of wine and fire lingers in your chest, but the air has shifted. There's a strange stillness pressing in, a quiet that doesn't feel sacred or peaceful, but wary. A faint mist clings to the low fields ahead, and beyond it, you spot the faint outline of a village, roofs that sag under damp thatch, a broken fence, a single church bell hanging silent in its tower. You approach slowly, your boots crunching over frost-hardened dirt. The village looks wrong, too quiet. You cross into the square, where wooden carts lean abandoned against walls, and doors hang slightly ajar. A crow caws once from a rooftop, then flies off into the gray. At the edge of the green, a group of people huddle near a fireless pit. They sit too still. Their eyes seem distant. One woman rocks back and forth, mumbling to no one. A boy nearby rubs his arm rhythmically, over and over. You sit on a bench beside a man with a long scar across his temple. He doesn't turn to look at you, just mutters. It was the bread. At first, you don't understand. Then someone places a loaf of dark rye in your hands. It's dense, streaked with blackish veins along its crust. You break it open and a musty, almost metallic scent escapes. Faintly sour, strangely earthy. Your fingers tingle just from touching it. Ergot, a fungus. Invisible when mixed into the rye flour, but deadly when consumed. Ergot thrives in damp fields and cool harvests, conditions that crept across medieval Europe more than once. When baked into bread, it became an accidental poison and an unintentional window into madness. The man finally turns to face you. His eyes twitch slightly, and his pupils are oddly wide. "The devil danced on my tongue," he says, voice hoarse. "He told me to walk into the river, said I could breathe there." You feel a chill settle deep in your bones. Historians still debate the full extent of ergotism's reach. Some call it the cause of mass hysteria, blame for witch hunts, dancing plagues, and entire villages slipping into shared hallucinations. Others believe it only affected isolated pockets, where poor grain met poorer storage. But no one disputes its effects: burning sensations in the limbs, convulsions, paranoia, and vivid, often terrifying visions. Some victims experienced St. Anthony's fire, a condition named by monks who tried to treat its symptoms, limbs turning black, pain like acid beneath the skin. Others fell into trance-like states, wandering into forests or wells, mumbling prophecy or madness. There were reports of women giving birth to shadows, of men screaming at invisible beasts, of priests speaking in tongues. You glance again at the loaf in your hand. It looks harmless, familiar, even. That was the danger. A woman sits nearby, her head wrapped in linen. She hums quietly, then stops and begins laughing, sharp and sudden, like a bell dropped on stone. She stares at you, then blinks, then begins to sob without moving. A healer steps from a hut and beckons you inside. Her hut smells of lavender and burnt onion. You sit as she prepares a tea, mint and barley, she says, to keep the tremors back. She doesn't bother asking if you're afflicted. Maybe she sees it in your eyes. She tells you how entire families once fell ill after a single loaf, how some were treated with cold baths, fasting, or fumigated herbs. But often, there was no cure, only waiting, praying, and trying not to listen to what the shadows whispered. In the corner of her hut, bundles of rye hang from the ceiling. She points to a few with dark splotches. You can't always see it, she mutters, but it sees you. You sip the tea slowly. The bitterness grounds you. The hut holds steady around you. You begin to understand that this was not about indulgence, not about spiritual exploration. This was a different kind of altered state, one imposed without consent, a horror that mimicked ecstasy, blurred the line between vision and nightmare, and left people shattered in its wake. And yet, it changed the world. The healer leans closer. They say some saw angels, she whispers. Others said they danced with saints. But most just screamed. You ask her why it wasn't stopped sooner, why they kept baking the bread. She sighs and shrugs. Hunger makes poor choices. And ergot does not bloom like a warning. It hides. You leave the hut as fog creeps down from the hills, curling between stones and chimneys. The village remains mostly silent. A child chants a rhyme to herself. An old man stares at his fingers like they don't belong to him. You walk past them quietly. As you leave the square, you think again of the other places you've passed. Feasts lit by candlelight, blue lotus blooming in sacred basins, opium tea sipped in moon-drenched gardens. Each one offered something voluntary, chosen, held. But here, the high was a thief. It didn't elevate. It didn't heal. It stole faces, names, and sleep. It robbed people of reality and left them trapped inside a body that betrayed them. And yet, even in this devastation, you see traces of humanity. A hand placed gently on a shaking shoulder. A lullaby sung into the dark. A healer who still brews tea each morning for those who remember nothing but fear. The stars have begun to pierce the clouds again. You walk on, past the edge of the village, toward a road lit only by moonlight and memory. You don't look back. You carry with you the smell of the bread, the crack in the healer's voice, the way the laughter turned to sobbing without pause. And you understand. Some highs are gentle. Others are gods. But some are chaos in disguise, masquerading as hunger, disguised as a loaf cooling on the hearth. And that, too, is part of the story. The moon follows you now, casting silver across open ground as you leave behind the haunted quiet of the village. You move westward through unfamiliar trees, where the bark is smoother, the birds speak different songs, and the scent of the earth feels new. There are no chapels here, no cottages, no worn cobblestone roads, only wilderness alive with its own rhythm. And then the sound changes. Drums, not loud, not harsh, just steady, low, like a heartbeat rising through the soil. You follow it, drawn toward firelight, flickering beyond a ridge. As you crest the hill, the scene unfolds below. A ring of people gathered around a central flame, their silhouettes moving in unison, their shadows swaying like branches in the wind. This is not a ritual you've read about in European manuscripts or dusty records. This is older, deeper. You've arrived in the lands of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, lands rich with memory, layered with ceremony, and steeped in a different understanding of how to walk between worlds. You approach the circle slowly. A woman with long gray braids greets you with a nod. Her eyes are calm. Her voice is soft but firm as she offers you a seat beside her. The others do not stare. They simply make space. Beside the fire rests a woven basket filled with dried leaves and bundles of herbs. A pipe carved from red stone is passed from hand to hand. When it reaches you, you notice the scent even before the smoke. Rich tobacco, yes, but also something more floral, more ancient. You inhale gently. It's sharp and grounding, not intoxicating in the way you've come to expect, but ceremonial. She tells you, this is sacred. It's not for forgetting. It's for listening. The group is quiet for a while, each breath a rhythm. Then a man across the fire begins to speak, not a sermon, not a story, but a remembering. He recounts a dream he had about his grandfather, who showed him a stream that flowed backward. The others nod. They do not interrupt. Every dream has meaning. Every voice holds weight. Later, another bundle is prepared, peyote buttons, dried and sliced, mixed into a cup with warm water. It's bitter, earthy, and hard to swallow. But no one rushes. This is not taken lightly. It is medicine. It is prayer. You're offered a small portion, not enough to drift far, but enough to feel. You sip. The taste stays in your mouth long after you set the cup down. The fire crackles. The drums resume. 2 now, 1 fast, 1 slow. The sound vibrates in your chest. Around you, the night deepens, but the space inside the circle brightens somehow. Not in light, but in presence. You feel your thoughts begin to loosen. Not unravel, but release. You no longer feel like a visitor. You feel like a thread in a tapestry you don't fully understand, but are honored to be part of. A third offering is prepared. This one is powdered, snuff made from wild tobacco, tree bark, ash. A thin reed is used to blow it into the nostrils. The effect is immediate. A sharp sting, tears, clarity, not pleasant, but purposeful. The mind sharpens. The breath deepens. The moment slows. This is not about euphoria. This is about alignment. Historians still debate how to categorize indigenous plant use in the Americas. Some call it shamanism. Others dismiss it as folklore. But none of those labels fit neatly. Because what you witness here is not science or superstition. It is relationship with the land, with the plant, with the story. You begin to see how different this approach is from what came before. There's no hiding, no secrecy, no priest behind a curtain or apothecary behind a locked door. Everything is shared, open, circular. Every part of the ritual has intention. Every element, a feather, a chant, a flicker of flame, has its own role in the unfolding of the night. One woman begins to sing softly. Her voice is rough but steady, not performance, invocation. Others join, their harmonies not polished but woven. You feel yourself swaying again, not because you are dizzy, but because the ground beneath you feels like it's breathing. A man with painted hands places a small drum in your lap. You do not know the song, but somehow, you find the beat. You glance at the fire. The flames move slowly now, as if underwater. Sparks lift and drift upward, not fast, not frantic. Each ember floats like a thought too fragile to speak aloud. Your heart is calm, your limbs warm, your mind, so often noisy, has grown soft, spacious, and through this softness, something stirs. Not a vision, not a hallucination, more like a remembering. You feel the shape of your ancestors, not their faces or names, but their presence. Like standing in a hallway filled with coats that still carry their scent, you feel held, accounted for. Someone whispers a prayer in a language you do not understand. It lands on your skin like a breeze. Historians still argue whether these rituals should be considered medicine, spirituality, or culture. But perhaps they are all three. Or perhaps they exist in a category that doesn't require definition, just participation. Because here, the plants are not consumed for novelty. They are partners, teachers. Their purpose is not escape, but reconnection. You sit in silence as the ritual closes. One by one, people return their instruments, their cups, their pipes to the fire's edge. Some place feathers or stones in the center, offerings not of value, but of meaning. You do the same, placing a twig in the ashes, a simple thank you, a gesture of presence. You rise. The stars overhead are brilliant now, not twinkling, but steady, watching. You look back once. The circle remains. No one speaks, but everyone feels. You walk into the trees once more. Your steps are quieter now, not because the world is hushed, but because you have. And as you walk, you realize, of all the ways you've witnessed the mind loosen, this one might be the most powerful, because it didn't lift you out of yourself. It brought you back in. The forest thins behind you, and the rhythm of the drums fades like breath against your back. You move forward now through shifting terrain, part meadow, part ruin, part crossroad, where paths of knowledge once converged and then splintered apart. There is no single culture here, no single belief, just remnants, objects left behind by those who once walked between medicine and magic. You come upon an old stone building, partly crumbled, partly preserved by ivy and time. Its arches are Roman, but the windows are Gothic. Its steps are worn from centuries of feet. A mosaic near the door shows a serpent curled around a staff, one half of its body gold, the other black. Inside, the air smells of aged parchment, dried herbs, and something faintly sweet, like wine that's forgotten it was ever meant to be drunk. This is no hospital, no church, no apothecary. It is all of them. You wander the halls lined with shelves of glass vials, wooden drawers, and brittle manuscripts. There is no order. A jar of rose petals sits beside crushed bone. A scroll about digestion lies next to one on dreams. A dried toad hangs from a nail beside a bundle of lavender. A woman stands near the far wall, robed in green wool, her sleeves stained with pigment and wax. She doesn't flinch at your arrival. She simply raises her eyes, smiles faintly, and returns to grinding a pale root on a slate board. Mandrake, she says, without needing to be asked. This one was harvested during the full moon, dug from the ground by a black dog, as the old texts instruct. You remember the monk and his dream tea, the witches and their ointment, the apothecary with his glass vials. Now, here. All of them seem to converge. She adds crushed valerian and a pinch of belladonna, then sage, then honey. The mixture becomes a thick paste, the scent floral but bitter underneath. This, she explains, is for nightmares, not to erase them, to meet them. She speaks in the tone of someone who has spent her life walking along that narrow line, where remedies end and rituals begin. She points to a wall etched with symbols, moons, birds, open palms, vines. They called this magic, she says, But everything on this shelf has healed someone, and everything in that chest has frightened someone else. You begin to understand. The separation between healer and witch was not one of knowledge, but of reputation. The same root that could cure pain could also cause hallucinations. The same herb used to ease childbirth could, in a different dose, stop a heart. What changed wasn't always the plant. It was the story told about the person using it. Historians still debate whether the so-called wise women and cunning folk of medieval Europe were herbalists, mystics, or charlatans. Some were midwives, others were feared for knowing too much, or for knowing anything at all. And many walked the line quietly, helping where they could, hiding when they had to. You ask the woman if she sees herself as a healer or a sorceress. She laughs, not cruelly, but with the weariness of someone who has been asked the same question for far too long. I see myself as someone who listens, she says, to the body, to the dream, to the root. She tells you about a man who came to her with visions, angels with burning wings that spoke in riddles. He thought he was cursed. She gave him a tea of chamomile, poppy, and fennel. He slept without dreams for 3 nights. On the 4th, the angels returned, but they whispered instead of shouted. He wrote down what they said. He became a poet. You ask if the tea cured him. No, she says. It gave him room to listen differently. She invites you to try a brew yourself. Not to fly, not to forget, but to feel the edge of understanding. You sit as she prepares it. Rosemary for remembrance. Time for clarity. A single petal of white rose. No poppy, no mandrake. This one is made for seeing, not for leaving. You sip, the taste is warm, resinous, grounding. It reminds you of mossy wood and old ink. You feel no rush, no blur, just a widening, like someone has opened a door inside your chest and let in a breeze. You close your eyes. You do not see visions. You do not dream, but you begin to notice things you hadn't. The soft tremble of your fingers, the memory of a face you forgot you missed, the smell of smoke that once clung to your mother's coat. The tea does not speak. It reminds. When you open your eyes, the room looks the same. But you feel aligned with it now, less like a visitor, more like a participant. You thank her? She hands you a small pouch filled with dried herbs. Boil these when your mind grows hard, she says. Let them make it soft again. As you walk through the corridor, you notice inscriptions carved into the beams above. One in Latin, one in a runic script, one in something older. You can't read any of them, but they all say the same thing. In their way, know what you give, know what you take. You step outside. The light has shifted, softer, golden, falling sideways through the trees. You think of all the substances you've encountered on this long walk. Teas, ointments, powders, pipes, some used in joy, others in fear, some embraced, others hidden. And in the middle of it all, the people, each one trying to ease pain, reach spirit, find meaning, or remember who they were before the noise took over. You understand now why history doesn't always agree on what's medicine and what's magic, because sometimes they're the same thing. You continue down the road, the pouch in your hand, the tea in your blood. The wind carries the scent of something sweet and strange, something growing. And as you walk, you feel a quiet, a firm truth settle deep into your bones. What heals us is rarely only the thing we take. It's how we hold it, how we honor it, how we let it change us, just enough to return as someone softer. You walk slower now, not from fatigue, but from something deeper, like the hush that falls after a storm. You feel the weight of the path behind you, the laughter and the grief, the roots and the wine, the drums and the whispers. It all lingers inside you, like smoke in the folds of your clothing, familiar, unsettling, precious. The road beneath your feet grows softer, less a road, more a meadow unfurling with tiny white flowers. They glow faintly in the moonlight, brushing your ankles like memories too delicate to name. The forest has thinned into nothing. The ruins are far behind. Ahead lies only open field and sky. You find yourself standing at a low rise where a single wooden bench waits, worn smooth by time and weather. You sit, and your bones exhale. The night is still, but something in the stillness hums. You look up at the stars. They're not the same stars you saw before. Or maybe they are, but you've changed. They seem less distant now. Less like objects and more like thoughts you once had. Long ago, before language came along and divided everything into categories. Here, in this final stretch of your journey, there is no more needing to understand, just the soft invitation to feel, to rest, to hold the paradox of it all in your palm without needing to name it. That getting high could mean so many things. Sacred, silly, dangerous, divine, sometimes healing, sometimes haunting, sometimes both in the same breath. You think of the blue lotus petals in the sacred basin, the hashish passed between poets, the opium tea steeped under moonlight. You think of the mandrake dug at midnight, the mushroom circles in the damp earth, the mead that sang of gods and loss. You remember the man with his hand on fire, the woman who dreamed of angels, the child who danced until her feet bled. You remember the question that whispered through it all. Were they escaping or returning? Historians still wrestle with that, still argue in margins and lecture halls, measuring intention against effect, context against consequence. But out here, under the sky that saw all of it unfold, it doesn't feel like a question that needs answering. It feels like one to be carried. You hear footsteps behind you. You don't turn. A figure sits beside you, neither man nor woman, old nor young. They don't speak, just breathe. After a while, you realize they smell like every place you've been tonight. Frankincense, poppy, wet moss, sweetgrass, burnt cedar, mead. You say nothing. They say nothing. The stars shimmer in response. You're not high, not exactly, but you're not entirely grounded either. You're somewhere in the middle, a place few people linger long, because it's hard to explain. A place where insight feels possible, where grief and joy hold hands without argument. The figure beside you finally speaks, voice low and even. You remember now. It's not a question. It's not even a statement. It's a mirror, and it lands in you like a bell tone that keeps ringing long after the sound has stopped. You don't answer. There's nothing to say. You just let the silence ripple outward, joining all the other silences from the people you met, the rituals you witnessed, the hallucinations you heard described and half believed. The figure stands. Their shadow stretches long across the grass. They walk away without turning back. You watch until they become part of the landscape, just another contour in the dream of the world. And then you rise. 2. The path has looped without your noticing. Or maybe it was always a circle. You begin walking again, not toward another vision or revelation, but simply forward. Each step feels lighter, though your pack is full of memory. You think about how, in every age, people reached for something, plant, powder, prayer, that helped them feel just a little less separate from the great mystery, from themselves, from each other, not because they were weak, but because they were human. You think about how getting high was never just about the substance. It was about context, intention, who gave it to you, what you hoped to find, what you were afraid to lose. You think about the moments of clarity that came after the haze, about the ways people rebuilt their lives after dancing too close to the edge. You think about the small, defiant beauty of the tea, the pipe, the cup, not as escape hatches, but as doorways, invitations. You walk until the meadow ends and the world begins again. Faint sounds return, bells in the distance, maybe, or wind chimes, a dog barking once, the distant creak of a wooden sign swinging slowly in the breeze. You feel yourself returning, cell by cell, but you're not the same. You are softer now, wiser, maybe, or simply quieter inside. You reach a crossroads, no signpost, no names, just paths leading off into different kinds of morning. You don't need to choose yet. You pause, and with one last breath, you say thank you, not to anyone, not aloud, but to the path itself, for holding you, for unsettling you, for reminding you that even the most altered state can bring you closer to who you really are. If you listen closely enough, then you turn and begin the slow walk home. Final wind down, 300 words. And now, dear traveler, you've returned from the hush of midnight temples and fire-lit circles, from the slow swirl of incense and tea steam, from fields of poppies and flickering candlelight behind forgotten doors. You've walked softly through centuries of longing, healing, risk, and wonder, through stories too old to name and moments too fragile to keep. But something stays with you. Maybe it's the memory of a bitter root pressed into your palm, or the echo of a drumbeat that seemed to match your breath. Maybe it's just the weightless clarity that follows deep understanding, the sense that, even now, across time and distance, someone sat by the same kind of fire, asked the same quiet questions, and longed for the same kind of peace. Let that comfort settle around you now, like a worn blanket. Let your limbs go heavy, your breath slow and steady. Your thoughts drift like soft embers into the dark. You're safe here. There's nothing left to seek tonight, no visions to chase, no lessons to gather, only the stillness waiting at the edge of sleep, patient and kind. Let it take you. Let the path fade gently behind you. You've journeyed far enough. Close your eyes. Let the quiet hold you. And if you wake before the sun, may you remember something from this night, a scent, a word, a flicker of candlelight, and smile, knowing you were there, that you walked those roads, that you listened, and that the world, even in its strangeness, is full of secret, sacred ways to come back to yourself. Good night.